thank you everyone who is joining us. Just so that you know you're in the right place, this is a workshop or webinar on applying to graduate school. And so my name is Meltem Erol, and I'm the Director for Graduate Student Outreach in the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley. So just to give you a heads up, the outline for today, we have about an hour, and we're going to talk about, we're going to start with talking about the difference between a master's and a PhD program. We'll spend the bulk of our time talking about the requirements to get into graduate school and that graduate committees look at. We'll talk a little bit about how the review process is done, and then I want to save about 20 minutes for questions and answer. I suspect a lot of you have a lot of questions, and I do want to preface this by saying there are probably a lot of questions, especially for those of you who are applying to graduate school this year, regarding the impact of COVID-19 on graduate admissions. And unfortunately, I probably am not going to know a lot of the answers to the questions that you may have, simply because we haven't gotten there yet. We probably won't know how graduate admissions is going to review and what they're going to do regarding spring 2020 and the current situation until they actually get into those review meetings after the application process. So what I will do is I've been on review committees for about the past 7 years, and I'm going to take the knowledge that I know and sort of talk about how I think they're going to use and to adapt to the current situation. But just please note that that's my opinion. We don't actually at this point have any hard information on what graduate admissions is going to look like for fall 2020. And just keeping in mind that this is a global issue, so every graduate school across the globe is going to have the same issue that Berkeley admissions or any other admissions department is going to have. And just a reminder that this is focused very much on engineering graduate schools. So everyone is welcome. If you're thinking of applying to a different graduate program, that's fine. But please note that the comments and the data that I'm showing is really specifically for engineering. And before we go on, I just have a couple of housekeeping things that I need to let you know. So the chat has been disabled for panelists. If you have a question, the raising your hand feature has also been disabled, so the best way to get your questions answered is to submit them through Q&A. We'll answer them at the end. And please know that if you do not get your question answered, we will have a FAQ section for all the questions we did not get to during this webinar, and we'll post a Google link and share it with all of you. In addition, this webinar is also being recorded and will be up on YouTube tomorrow or the next day, and you will receive a link to that as well. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to start the presentation. Okay, so the number one question that I get from students who want to go to graduate school but aren't sure what to do after that, they've decided they want to go to grad school but aren't sure what program and how to apply, is what's the difference between a master's and a PhD? And normally what I recommend to students is you answer the question, or you think about the question, do you want a research career? Do you want, and by what I mean by that is, do you want to be in the lab at the discovery stage of something new? For those of you who have worked in a lab, you know what I mean. There are no answers to the research that you're doing. If you run into a problem, there's no way to look it up to see what the solution is. You have to kind of figure it out. So if we use the current situation as an example, do you want to be one of those researchers in the lab searching for a vaccine for COVID-19? Do you want to be one of the researchers studying COVID-19 right now to see what kind of impact it has on the body and how it's changing? So these are questions that researchers are asking, but there's no answer to. You're trying to discover something new. And for that kind of work, that requires a PhD for the most part. And if that's something that you're interested in, then you want to think about getting a PhD as your graduate degree. If that doesn't really excite you, or you're like, you know what, I'm not really a lab person, then you probably want to be on the other end of the discovery stage, which is more the implementation. And that's what most of industry does. Most industry jobs will take an idea that has already been discovered in the lab or coded, and they make it faster, better, more efficient, more accessible, and distributing it to communities globally. If that's something that you're more interested in, then you want to think about a master's program. And there's, up until a few years, about 10-15 years ago, there really was only one kind of master's program, which was a thesis-based master's. Nowadays, we have lots of different types of master's programs. So it's kind of important to sort of disseminate the different types of master's programs that we have. So once you kind of think within yourself, what kind of a graduate degree do you want? Do you want that research career, or you're not sure, or yes, you do? If it's a yes or no answer, then the path is a little bit more clear. If the answer is I'm not sure, depending on what year you are, if you're still a sophomore or a junior, you have time to sort of answer that question. If you're a rising senior and you still don't know the answer to that question, maybe you want to do the first kind of master's that we have, which is a thesis-based master's. And this is a more traditional master's. They're generally 2 years. You take graduate level courses and you do a research project and you write a thesis at the end, which is why it takes 2 years to do this. It mirrors the first 2 years of a PhD program, but gives you the flexibility to know that, okay, if you don't want to go on for a PhD, you can stop with the master's and go into industry, or go into to a technical line of work. However, if you've discovered you really like research and you want to continue, then the master's with the thesis allows you to be competitive for PhD programs. That is the only master's program really that will prepare you for a PhD program. If you go the route of some of these other MS programs that I'm going to talk about, they don't have that research component that PhD programs are looking for. So if you're on the fence, especially if you're graduating, if you're on the fence and you're not sure and you don't feel that the PhD is right for you at this moment, then I would strongly recommend looking into a thesis-based master's program. The other master's programs are sort of ones that have evolved over the past decade or so. And the most common one these days now is what we call an MS degree in engineering, but it's a terminal degree. And what that means is that you can't go beyond that MS degree in most cases. It's course-based. And the best example of this kind of a master's is the 5th-year master's program here at Berkeley. So it's 1 additional year. You're taking coursework, graduate level coursework, advanced level graduate coursework in your discipline, so mechanical, civil, bio, and then that's it. You're not doing a project. In most cases, you're not doing a project. You're not doing a research paper. You're just taking advanced level courses to advance your knowledge in this specific area. And for that, you get an MS in whatever your field is, and you go into industry or whatever line of work. And that kind of a master's program takes a year, 2 semesters, 3 quarters, depending on the school. What we have in more recent years is what we call a professional master's in engineering program, MEng for short. And we have one of those here at Berkeley, and other schools, I believe MIT has one, and several other institutions are starting to have these. It's the best way to look at it is it's a hybrid degree. So if an MBA married an MS degree, it would be the MEng. So it's a 1-year program. About half your classes are business courses, the other half are engineering courses, and then you do a capstone project at the end, which is very much industry focused. So this degree has no research component at all. It's very much focused on people who are interested in going directly into industry that also want a little bit of a business background. On a side note, Berkeley just approved a combined MBA MEng degree that you should be able to complete in 2 years as well. So if that's something you're interested in, that is a fairly new program. And in some fields, there are now specialized master's programs. And for this, you want to definitely do your research, because you do not want to invest in a graduate degree that is not going to help you get professionally to where you want to go. So some fields like bioengineering, actually a subfield within bioengineering, requires that you have a specialized master's program, such as Master's in Translational Medicine. So when you are doing your research into going into a specific field, now granted, most fields do not have a specialized master's program. Most of them are going to recognize any of the other 3 types of masters I've talked about, but just to make sure that you are going to be qualified for the career path that you want to go, and you want to make sure that you are getting the right kind of graduate degree. And I believe even specialized masters take 1 to 2 years, depending if there is a clinical component like the MTM. For PhD programs, they're 5 years. Right now, the average is probably more about 5.5 years. And the options are MS, PhD, and PhD. Although, to be honest, both of these categories are looked on as PhD students, doctoral students. The difference is, if you already have an MS degree and you're going into a program, you would apply for PhD only because you already have an MS. If you're going straight out of undergrad, you'll get your master's along the way in a PhD program, and you would apply to MS PhD. What MS PhD is not, is it's not for those students who are not sure if they want a PhD or not, and so they're going to start with the master's, start in this MS PhD program and leave with a master's if they think that if they feel if PhD is not right for you. That's really not what this major is intended for. If you're not sure, then you really should go the MS thesis route, and then decide after that if that's the way that you want to go. Okay, so that's sort of in a nutshell the difference between masters and, oh, one other thing I should note is most master's programs are not funded, meaning that you would have to pay for the degree yourself. PhD programs are fully funded in engineering, meaning that your tuition and fees would be paid for by the institution, the department, your PI, as well as you would receive a stipend, a living stipend, to pay your bills for housing and rent. You're not going to get rich as a graduate student, but you should also not have to pay out of pocket to go to graduate school as a PhD student. Okay, so when to apply? This depends on what program that you are applying to. So master's programs are extremely flexible. Master's programs, you can apply at any point in your career. So there will be a program for you at any point in your life, given your life circumstances. So if some people want to do a master's program and sort of get it out of the way, if you will, the fifth year master's is a really good option for that, or other one-year programs, and you want to go straight out of undergrad, continue, get your MS degree, and now you're done. Other people, if you have a great job offer and it's your dream job and you really are burnt out, Berkeley's done a number on you, you want to go out and work, that's fine too. You get your job, you start working, and then you decide, you know what, I really need a graduate degree to get to the next level. There will be a program for you that fits your circumstances at that point. So if you are in a position where you now have financial obligations, maybe you have a mortgage or you have children, and you can't afford to take time off, there are online programs, reputable online programs. And in fact, after this current situation that we find ourselves in, I suspect there will be more online reputable programs from schools offering master's programs in engineering. So for those of you that are, perhaps not for the seniors, but those of you who are freshmen and sophomores in the next few years, look out for schools, big, more well-known engineering schools that may be offering online MS degrees. So you do not need to quit your job if you're doing an online program. And if online is not for you, but you really want that in-person classroom experience, but you can't quit your job, there are some schools that will have in-person master's programs for working professionals. The only thing is not every school has all of these different options. So you have to be mindful of, all right, is it more important that I go to Stanford, or is it more important that I have the flexibility of the kind of master's I want? So my advice to students who are not sure about grad school and are thinking of a master's program is don't rush, because there is no rush. There is no need to rush. So if you feel that there's pressure on you to go to grad school, but you're just not ready, it's okay. Just go work for a little while and figure out what kind of master's program you want, where you want to do it at, and what kind of a educational setting is going to work best for you. Do you work better online? Have you discovered that online actually works for you, gives you more flexibility? Or do you find that you miss the classroom and you really need something that you need in class, in person, with a faculty member in person? So it gives you that flexibility. PhD programs are slightly less flexible. For most faculty members, they prefer students coming right out of undergrad or an MS program and continue straight without taking any gap years. And the reason for that is all of the information that you have learned as an undergrad, as a master's student, is still fresh in your mind when you graduate. All the theories, all the research that you did, all the internships that you've had, all of that is still fresh in your mind, and you can just continue on with all of that knowledge through a PhD program. If you take a gap year or several years, then some of that information starts to get a little gray, a little rusty. You may not remember all of those theories or courses that you took that aren't related to the work that you're currently doing. So that being said, it doesn't mean that if you don't go straight out of undergrad that you can't get a PhD. It just means that it might be a little bit more catch-up work for you academically to brush up on some of the things that you would have known coming straight out of undergrad, but maybe are a little rusty 4 or 5 years out. The ideal time to come to apply to a PhD program, if it's not right out immediately after as an undergrad, would be to within a few years. The longer that you put between the time that you graduate and the time you come back as a PhD student, the harder it gets, more for you academically, because things will be rusty. But it does get, you are now competing. The further out you are from from graduation, you are competing with those new students that are graduating and that have everything kind of fresh in their mind. So just things to keep in mind. Deadlines, both programs almost universally admit for fall. That's not to say all of them, but the majority of programs are admitting for fall. And so the deadlines will generally be in December or early January. Some programs will have some spring admits. Most likely they're going to be master's programs, and those deadlines are generally going to be at the end of summer, early fall. You want to triple check deadline dates and times, especially time zones, because since everything is online, all applications are online, there is very little forgiveness for if you forget a deadline date, because once 11:59 p.m. or 12:01 a.m. of that deadline date hits, the application automatically closes, and very few schools make exceptions for people who missed a deadline. In order to get an exception, it needs to be the level of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico several years ago that allowed students to, because there was no internet access and because things were so bad on the ground, schools allowed applicants from Puerto Rico to apply later past their deadline date. That is the kind of scenario, unless it's a technical issue on behalf of the institution, that is the kind of scenario that schools will make exceptions for when they are making, if you miss a deadline. So double, triple, quadruple check those deadline dates and time zones. Okay, now we're going to get into what do you have to do to get into grad school? What are the things that grad programs are looking at? These are not listed in any particular order, so please don't read into that. But the first five, GPA, GRE, letters of recommendation, experience, and statement of purpose, are the basic building blocks for what graduate programs across the board at most institutions are going to look at, PhD or master's. They're just going to look at them differently depending on the type of degree that you're looking for. But these are generally the criteria. This last one with the asterisk, personal statement, is one that Berkeley takes very seriously. We'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but it is not a technical essay. It's a little bit more of a human essay. They want to get to know who you are, and not every institution requires this essay or even wants this essay. And we will talk about each of these criteria and how COVID-19 might impact each of these criteria. So grades. Very important. And this year they might perhaps play a bigger role than in the past because of what's happening with COVID-19. So most schools are going to look for two grade point averages. One is going to be the overall. If you came in as a freshman, that's going to be whatever GPA is on your transcript right now, that is your overall GPA. And just a note, so you apply to graduate school a year in advance. If you're continuing straight, you're going to apply a year in advance, which means that when you apply, your senior year grades are not going to post yet. So whatever grades you have at the end of your junior year is the GPA that you're going into graduate school with. Your fall, if you are a senior right now and you take courses in fall 2020, those grades are not going to be reflected in your GPA when you apply to graduate school because of the deadline dates. So that's one note. The second note I wanted to mention is for transfer students. So if you transfer from a community college into your four-year to Berkeley, and you're now applying for grad school, the overall GPA you have to look at carefully. So some schools might have instructions under this category for if you transfer to a university as a transfer student, this is what we want you to do. Most universities don't have that kind of instruction, and so the way that I read this is your overall undergraduate GPA. And I recommend students, if you transferred from a community college, to recalculate your overall GPA to all of the courses you took after you graduated from high school in community college, as well as your Berkeley GPA. So you have to recalculate every course that you have taken, and 99% of the time it's going to end up being higher than what your current GPA is. So that's for transfer students. So the second GPA, so as I said, schools are going to ask for two types of GPA, your overall, and then the second GPA is going to be an element of one of the following. So at Berkeley, we want to know your last 2 years GPA. And so for most of you, that means you have to recalculate your GPA for the last 2 years. If you came in as a freshman, it's excluding your freshman year grades. If you came in as a transfer student, it is probably the GPA that's on your transcript in that moment. Other schools might ask for an upper division technical GPA. They might ask for a major GPA. So it's not going to be universal the way that the overall GPA is. So almost everyone is going to have to do some version of recalculation for that second GPA requirement. What they're looking for are trends. So the biggest trend that they're looking for in GPA, especially for those, is that your GPA might not be artificially inflated with non-technical courses. So if your overall GPA is 3.5, but your technical courses are all C's and D's, but your non-technical courses are all A's and A pluses, um, that's not quite what they're looking for. So they will look for trends to see, okay, we want to see more A's and B's on the technicals than the non-technicals. Well, actually, they don't really look at the non-technicals as far as being relevant to how you're going to succeed in grad school. Excuse me. So if you have a lower GPA, meaning it's not quite where you want it to be, um, and there's an explanation for it, and to the degree you feel comfortable sharing what that explanation might be, you can write about that in your essay. And by what that explanation, what the kinds of explanations are looking for are ones that are external forces that are preventing you from spending more time on your studies. So did you have to work to support yourself to go to college? Did you have to work to support your family? Did you have were there health issues with yourself or taking care of someone in your family? Are there family issues and that are affecting your ability to focus on your coursework? These are the kinds of things that they're looking for. These are the kinds of reasons that will shed light onto why your GPA might not be where you want it to be. If it's just because, you partied too much your first year, or, you didn't spend enough time on your courses, they were harder than you expected, that's more common and they don't need an explanation for that. But if there's something that's really external that affected your grades, then that's what if you feel comfortable sharing that information, that's the kind of reasons that they're looking for. And if you decide you're going to go into a graduate program first, an MS program first, and then transfer into a PhD programs will also look at your master's grades. Okay. Going back to GPA. So how COVID-19 might impact this year's GPA, how graduate admissions looks at grades. So historically, most programs have looked at technical courses to see how well you know the content, especially in the area that you're applying to. With spring 2020 grades being vastly pass, no pass, universally pass, no pass at most institutions, there's going to be an entire semester of grades that really not going to be able to tell how well you did in any given course. And so there might be this inclination to put more weight on the previous 3 semesters or upper division courses that you have taken for a letter grade. I don't know this for sure because I haven't actually seen how they're reviewing it, but they're going to have to compensate in some way for not being able to see how well those spring 2020 grades are. This is most impactful for rising seniors, those applying this year. For those of you who are sophomores, it's going to have a much less of an impact. Freshmen, for sure, it's likely not going to have an impact. And for juniors, it might have those that are rising juniors might have a minimal impact, but we'll have more information going into next year's admission cycle. But for this year, if you're a rising senior, it is what it is. The faculty know that. Faculty at every institution know that. And so my suspicion is they're going to place more emphasis on fall 2019 grades and perhaps your sophomore year grades, as well as the other criteria. There might be more weight put on letters of recommendation and experience because they won't have those spring 2020 grades. So GREs. So the GRE is the older sibling to the SAT. It's a very similar test. They're testing for verbal, quantitative, and then there's a writing component. So the impact is not clear. There's a lot of research that shows there's no correlation between how well you do on the GRE and how well you're going to do in graduate school. Nevertheless, graduate committees like it because this is a quantitative metric that they can look at to compare students. In engineering, math rules. So if you are studying for the GRE and you only have a limited amount of time, I would say put your energy into math. Verbal is becoming increasingly relevant, meaning they are looking at the verbal score more. However, I have never, in the past 7 years, seen a student not be admitted to a program because they had a low verbal score. So it's not a deciding factor. If you do well, it helps. If you don't do well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I wouldn't completely neglect it. I would say allow 2 months to prepare. And aim to take the test in August. So if you're applying directly, there's usually an August test date right around when the semester starts. And it's a good time to take it because if you don't like your score, there's a wait period before you can take it again, which tends to be end of September, early October. And then if you think of how busy traditionally you are during that time of year, it's just harder to take a 3.5 hour test in October than it is to take it in August. But a very important note for this year specifically, that might carry on into future years. Some programs are eliminating or not requiring the GRE for this upcoming admissions cycle. Much like many schools are putting a hold on SAT scores for this year, programs. The decision for GREs is going to come individually by department. It's not going to be universal across a university. So if one department, if you're applying to Stanford and you have a friend and you're applying to mechanical engineering and you have a friend that's applying to bioengineering, and bioengineering may have decided that they're not going to require GRE, does not mean that mechanical has also decided that. You need to confirm that directly through the department. It should be on their website. So at Berkeley, we have our bioengineering department is phasing out the GRE. It's made optional. Optional in the sense that it is truly optional. If you don't have it, they're not looking for it. So my recommendation is, if that is the case, don't submit GRE scores unless you feel that you did extremely well. For this year, civil and environmental engineering at Berkeley is also not requiring the GRE. They are full on not requiring it. There's no space, there's no place to input the scores, so you don't even have to submit it. So before you take the GRE, have your list of schools that you are applying to ready so that you can see who is actually requiring it. Do not send it GRE scores to schools that don't require it, because it will, unless you do extremely well, it won't have much of an impact and might end up hurting you. If you don't do well, they're not requiring it and you're sending in low GRE scores. Okay. Letters of recommendation. So letters of recommendation should verify your readiness for graduate school. So whoever's writing your letter should know you in an academic or a technical sense and be able to write a letter to say how they know you, what you have done for them, what kind of technical work or academic work you've done with them, and their assessment of how well you did that work and your readiness for grad school. So you want to ask people, you're going to need three. Most programs require three. You're going to want someone who can write really great things about you, because a negative letter, especially I suspect this year, or even a lukewarm letter, can keep you out despite your other qualifications. So you want to make sure that the people you are asking a letter from can write you a really good letter. At least one letter should be from a Berkeley faculty member, just because you're Berkeley undergrad, and so their expectation is you should have one from your home institution. And you don't want letters from graduate students, postdocs, or lecturers. And so I get a lot of students that say, I've been working on Professor so-and-so's lab with a graduate student, but I very rarely see the professor, so how should I get a letter from him or her? And the answer to that is work through your graduate student or postdoc. They know that they really can't write the letter for you and sign it, but they can certainly assist you and be the liaison to the faculty member to say, hey, Katie wants to go on to graduate school, and she would like a letter of recommendation. And usually what happens is the grad student will write a draft of the letter because they know you better than the faculty, and the faculty member will edit it. But work through your grad student or your postdoc to get those letters from faculty that you don't have as much interaction as you would like. Industry letters. So if you're applying to masters, any of the master's programs that we talked about, you want one letter from Berkeley because it's your home institution, but the remaining letters can be from people in industry. If you've interned or if you've worked in industry, letters from industry folks are fine. If you're applying to PhD programs, they want academic letters, meaning they want letters from at least one person that you've done research with. That's called a research letter. And then two other letters from either other researchers or faculty that you've taken a class with. They don't have to all be from Berkeley. If you've done work at other institutions, that's fine. But they are really looking for academic letters from academics who can talk about your technical ability to work in a lab. And one of the reasons, specifically for PhD, that they are so particular about who writes the letter is that they want to know that the people writing the letter understand the kind of work that you're going to be doing. So several years ago, there's a faculty member in the physics department who has a lot of very, very expensive equipment. And the replacement light bulb on one of these pieces of equipment was $80,000. And so they want to make sure that the students, their grad students, even if they haven't worked on this particular piece of equipment, know how to understand how expensive the equipment that they are working with, and that this is not their first time in a lab, because a PhD program is not for beginning researchers. It's for students who have already had research experience and are now looking to advance those skills. Okay, and in the age of COVID, for letters of recommendation, so I got some emails beforehand, before this presentation, questions about, well, how do you reconnect with a professor that maybe you haven't seen in a little while? Is it weird just to kind of out of the blue say, hey, professor, I'm applying to grad school, I'd like a letter of recommendation? And the answer is no, if you do it right. So professors are used to being asked for letters of recommendation. And so if you haven't talked to a professor in, say, a year or so, when you send them an email, just remind them what class you took, how well you did in the class, and how, if there's any distinguishing, something memorable about you from their class. Did you work on a project remind them of a project that you worked on, or if you did especially well on a midterm, if you had a really good exchange with them or discussion about something to sort of jog their memory that, a couple hundred students ago, this was you. Faculty have pretty good memories. So if you did well, they're likely to remember you. So send them an email and just ask them, and then say, keep it brief. So you have to get a lot of information in a few words. And then let them know you're applying to graduate school, whether it's an MS or PhD program, and would they be willing to write you a letter. So if they have a good experience with you, meaning that you weren't sort of the class clown or whatnot, they will most likely be willing to write you a letter. But do most of the homework ahead of time, meaning, remind them who you are, let them know when the letters are due and how many letters you need, what kind of program you're applying to. Okay. Experience. So experience is imperative for a graduate student, especially for a PhD program. So I'm going to work backwards here and talk first about PhD, and then we'll talk about master's. So when you're going into a PhD program, the only thing that is guaranteed with admissions is if you do not have research experience and you're applying to a PhD program, they will not admit you. And I suspect this year particularly, um, the the scrutiny over research experience in PhD programs is going to be pretty astute, because there's likely going to be an uptick in the number of applications that most programs receive. When the economy goes down, people go back to graduate school. So there is this likelihood that there will be more applications this year. I don't know that for a fact. This is speculation. That there will be more applications. Funding is a little bit tighter this year because of COVID-19, unless you're going into COVID-19 related research, in which case there might be lots of funding. But they're not going to take a risk on a student who wants to come and be a PhD student, which is 5 years of research, when you have not had research experience. Because the thought beyond just not having experience is, how do you know this is what you want to do if you haven't actually done it yet? So if you are thinking about a PhD program and you are not a senior, and you have not done research yet, think about it, because it's a good way to answer that original question: do I want a research career or not? You won't know that until you actually have that research experience. So PhD programs, when you write in your essay about the different experiences that you've had, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for different research experiences, or even one research experience that you have spent, 2 semesters in the same lab. They're not looking necessarily for quantity, they're looking for quality. So some students have 3 summers of research experience. Other students have one experience that they've been in that lab for, a year or year and a half, or maybe 2 semesters. That being said, we are cognizant of the fact that this summer was a watershed for most experiences. I know some people were able to keep their experiences online, but the vast majority of summer research programs and even internships were canceled this summer. And so that is something that we will have to work through. For sophomores and juniors, this is not a big impact. You still have next year. For rising seniors, if this was your summer for a research experience and now you're looking into graduate school, applying to a PhD program with no research experience, you might want to think of maybe doing that master's with a thesis first to get some research experience, because it's going to be very difficult to be admitted into a PhD program without any kind of hands-on research experience. For those of you who are, looking at master's programs don't all have an experience requirement. The terminal master's, where you're just taking courses, is probably the one that's going to look at this component the least, because they're not necessarily looking for students to have research experience. They just want to know that you want more advanced knowledge, and so they're going to look more closely at your courses. But if you're looking at that professional master's program, or if you're looking at the thesis base, they do want you to have some experience. And so experience can be an internship, research, technical clubs, and they want to know when you're writing your essay, what they really want to know is your role in the project and your specific contributions and if there were any outcomes. What they don't want to know, and I read a lot of essays where I see people talk about what the project was about. And that's great if you're writing a paper for what the project is about, but this is more like a job interview on paper. And so they want to know, okay, give us a brief summary of what the project was about, but tell us what you did. What was your role in this project and what did you contribute? And so that moves us to this next essay and the final criteria, which is your statement of purpose. This is a technical essay, and the every school, I usually say most schools, but I'm going to go on a limb and say every school is going to want elements of this kind of essay. We call it a statement of purpose. Other places might call it a personal statement. There's different terms for it, but what they want is the same information. You want to read the instructions carefully and answer their questions. And usually what they want to know is, why do you want to go to graduate school? So why are you interested in this MS program, or why are you interested in this PhD program? Why should they select you? So that's when you talk about your experiences. And why are you applying to that particular school in that particular department? So if we break this down, so why do you want to go to graduate school is your motivation. Like, why do you want an MS degree? Or why, more importantly for the PhD students, why do you want a PhD in the specific area of mechanical engineering? And so that's usually your intro paragraph. Why should they select you as the meat of your essay? That's your experience. And so if you take your resume and you break down all of the technical work experience that you've had, you want to elaborate on each of those experiences, whether they be industry or research experiences. For PhD, they want to know everything. Well, for any graduate program that you're applying to, you want to always highlight the experience that you've had in the field. It will just make you more competitive. So when you're talking about each of your experiences, you want to talk about what you did, a brief summary of what the project is about, what your role was, and what your contributions were, and were there any outcomes, if any. For most cases, there's no outcomes because usually you're there for a summer or for a semester, and it's not enough time to have any real outcomes. But should you happen to be there when there are outcomes, you can write about that. And you have to be very careful when you write about your experiences that you showcase, that you're giving them examples of how you integrated yourself into this team versus showing off, meaning I did this and I did this and I did this, and because I did all this work, this project was a success. So you want to be modest and humble, but also not hold back. You also want to showcase yourself. Because the way to look at this really is a job interview on paper. This is the only voice that you have is this essay, and possibly the next one if you're applying to Berkeley. But your GRE scores, your grades, those are quantitative metrics. Your letters of recommendation is an assessment of what others think of you. Your voice is this essay. And so you want to make sure that your motivation and your experience comes through in this essay. And finally, you want to talk about why you're applying to that particular department at that particular school. This is more important for PhD students than for masters. Master's programs, you can talk about why you're interested in the Master's in Engineering program at Berkeley. What drew you to that? What made you, you have a list of schools. There's, X amount of MEng programs across the country. Why did you select this one to apply to? And beyond, it's one of the top programs, because schools really don't want to hear that. MIT, Stanford, Michigan, we all know that these are the top programs. So you don't need to say that's why you're applying, because that's sort of, it's understood. For PhD, what they really want to know is that you've done your research. Who do you want to work with? If you were to come to computer science at UC Berkeley in the PhD program, who are the faculty that you were interested in working with and why? And this is not a full-on essay on every faculty member. You just want to say, I'm interested in artificial intelligence, and I'm interested in working with Peter Abil because his project on such and such seems really interesting to me. Also, I'm interested in Professor so-and-so who's working on such and such. So it's, 2 or 3 sentences on each faculty member just to give them an idea of, okay, this is the kind of work that you're interested in, and this is the kind of advisor that might be willing to take you on because that's the kind of work you're interested in, and that's the kind of work that they're doing. And finally, make sure that you don't write this essay the day before it's due. Some of you might be really gifted writers and can pull this off. The vast majority of us can't pull off what is required of this essay in a 24-hour period. And a poorly written statement can keep you out, because for the most part, a statement that was written overnight can generally be seen. It's generally obvious that it was written overnight. So you don't want to shortchange yourself because you waited till the last minute to write this essay. So usually what I tell students is applying to graduate school, if you're a senior applying this next coming year, applying to grad school is like a 3-unit course. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things you have to do. And so make sure that you stay on top of things and allocate the time you need to get all this information out there. And finally, the personal statement. So this is something that schools are all over the map on how much they want to know about you personally, outside of your technical ability. So that previous essay is a technical essay. That is, these are my qualifications and why I want to go to graduate school and why I would be a great selection for your institution. This statement is more about, this is who I am. This is me as Katie Smith, or this is me. And they want you to tell your story, who you are as an individual. And there's usually a prompt, so it's not something you have to come out of thin air. And there's usually several different prompts that they want to know about. And you select one. So it can include perseverance, if you had any hardship, if you got sick or you had to put yourself through school, there's a story there to be told. If you are involved with any outreach activities, extracurricular activities, particularly as it relates to engineering, but STEM overall. Have you done tutoring, mentoring? Who are you outside of the engineer that we know you are going to be? So the thing to be careful about is not every program requires this essay. So it is very important that you not overshare. So reading the instructions is careful. Berkeley has an entire essay and a requirement on this essay as part of their application process. MIT does not, and there's no inclination. I believe there's a question that has a limited number of characters that say, is there anything else you want us to know about you? So don't and Stanford is sort of in the middle. Stanford wants to know this information, but it incorporates it into that first essay, the technical essay. They say, tell us a little bit more about who you are. So be very careful on how much you share, and only give them what they want. Because if MIT doesn't want to know, they don't want to know. And if Berkeley wants to know and you don't give them anything, that's not good either. So you really want to make sure that, and everybody else is somewhere in the middle. Some schools are going to be like MIT. The vast majority of schools are going to be like Stanford, where they want to know a little bit, but not a whole separate essay. And then there's us, which is more like the UC system likely, that we want to know everything there is to know about you. Okay, the department-specific criteria. So most schools are not going to have any other requirements other than what we just talked about: the essays, your grades, your GRE scores, your letters of recommendation. However, some schools will, or some departments, I should say, not schools, will have some additional requirements. Bioengineering, as a field, does interviews. Well, I'm not sure what's happening this year, but up until last year, they had in-person interviews, meaning that they flew people out to actually meet with the faculty to interview them to see that if they would be a good selection for our program. If you get in bioengineering specifically, if you get to that point where you're invited for an in-person interview, or however they're going to do it next year, I tell students it is your opportunity to blow, because if you've gotten to that point, they are basically want to admit you. They just want to make sure that what they saw on paper reflects who you are in real life. So if you indicated that you want to go into synthetic biology and you want to work with these professors, and this is all the experience that you've had, that is the case when you actually come out to visit. And so the vast majority of students who come out for an interview are admitted. In some years, everybody is admitted. So it is really your opportunity. Don't have an off day. If there was ever a time in your life to not have an off day, it would be when you do in-person interviews. Other departments don't do a formal interview like that, but they might want to Skype or FaceTime, or now maybe Zoom, with you unofficially, meaning that they'll email you to say, hey, I wanted to talk more about your application. Do you have time the next day or so to chat? And it is informal in the sense that there's no set of questions. You're not being interviewed by a whole set of faculty members. But it is an interview because they are probing for more information. And generally what they're probing for is, what they want to know a little bit more about what kind of experience you have. And it's more almost like an interview for a job. They've seen that you've worked at a certain lab or a certain internship or a certain institution, and they think that might be a good fit for their lab, but they just want to probe you a little bit more on the experiences that you've had. So my recommendation when you get an email like that is, one, make sure you respond within 24 hours, because faculty, especially on an admissions committee, are very busy and they're not going to wait for you for 2 weeks to get back to them. So respond within 24 hours. Number two, treat it like an actual interview, even though it's not. And especially if you're going to be video conferencing like this, make sure that you, at least from the from the top up, look professional. You don't have to wear a tie or a suit, but don't show up in your pajamas, which some students have, and the faculty really don't like that. Um, and number three, maybe review your the essays that you wrote before you go on the call with them, because likely it is these phone calls are probably going to happen January, February, and you likely submitted your application end of November, early December, and so you might have been a little hazy on, okay, what were the details of what I wrote in my essay. So just um, read your essay again so that you know what you wrote and what they might question you about. Okay, we are almost to the end because I want to get to the questions. So the review process. Whatever you learned about undergraduate admissions and how you apply and are reviewed for undergraduate admissions, put that in a separate box because graduate admissions is completely different than undergrad. There's almost no parallel to how the review process goes. So the review process within graduate admissions is done completely by faculty. There are no voting members, no administrators who vote. So I am in most of these meetings, but I don't have a vote on who is admitted. And depending on the size of the department, larger departments will have subcommittees based on areas. So for example, electrical engineering and computer science is a gigantic department, and there is no way that they could just have one admissions committee. So there's actually two in that department, one for EE, one for CS, and then within that there are subcommittees. So in CS, there's going to be CS theory, CS AI, CS multiple different, I think there's about 7 or 8 different areas, and each of those areas will do their own admissions for the applications they receive for people who indicated they are interested in going into AI or theory or whatever the area is. So that's who reviews it. And so when you are putting your application together, your audience is the faculty in the area that you're interested in working with, because you need one of them in whatever program that you're applying to. You need a faculty member to say, yep, that student would be a good fit in my lab. And so how you do that is by presenting the strongest application that you can, knowing that those are the faculty that's your audience, the faculty in the department who you want to work with. The other thing they look at is the needs of the department. So, and by that, I mean, how many students are they admitting? Who needs graduate students? Are there new faculty members that have been hired who need more grad students? If there are new faculty members, that generally means that there might be a bigger bump in admissions that year, because new faculty, especially if they're just starting that year or the year before, are looking for grad students. So most departments are allocated a number from their larger graduate school or graduate division on how many students they can admit to their department. Then that allocation is parsed out among the different subcommittees and areas based on the needs of the department. So one area might say, you know what, we just had a ton of students graduate. We really need more grad students in this area. Another area might be, you know what, we had a huge yield last year. We're only going to admit 4 students this year instead of 10 that we normally do. This is information you won't know, unfortunately. So you just have to put forth the strongest application possible. And one of the biggest advice I give students is to, when you're writing your application and you're determining which faculty you're interested in working with, you want to make sure that you have a diverse number of faculty, meaning that you are not only wanting to work with one specific faculty member. Because if you do one specific faculty member and that one faculty member is not taking students this year, it doesn't matter how strong your application is. If you have put no other options on your application, the department has no choice but to not admit you, because if Professor Smith is not taking any grad students and you only want to work with Professor Smith, that's a no-go for everybody. So you have to make your application strong, is make sure that you put multiple faculty that you're interested in working with. Availability of funding. So as I said, for graduate students or for PhD students, the number PhD students are almost always funded in most programs. In fact, I would not recommend a student to accept an offer without funding for a PhD program. And so the availability of funding will also determine how many applicants they can admit and into what areas, because depending on where that funding is coming from. Master's students, so the faculty committee reviews master's and PhD. So that process is gonna be the same. But master's students are going to have less of an issue with the availability of funding and the needs of the department, because for most cases, it's a very large cohort that turns over every year, because most programs are 1-year programs. They're usually admitted by the hundreds. and you're not funded. And so they're really just looking for, okay, are students really interested in getting a master's, or are they just artificially applying to every MS program um, just because? So you want to, when if you're applying to master's programs, you want to put in the work to show that you really are interested in this master's program and why you are a good fit or competitive for that program. Knowing that if you fit most of the requirements and you have good grades and good letters of recommendation, the likelihood of admissions is pretty high. Um, the other thing I want to mention, PhD is usually reviewed first. So because it takes more work, there's more of an analysis for PhD because they're looking, individual faculty members are selecting students into their programs. So it's much more tedious to do PhD than masters. So they're done first. So MS students don't freak out in the spring if you haven't heard back yet. And on that note, the timeline is unique to each department. So I know there's a lot of social media and a lot of blogs and apps now where you can communicate, oh, I've heard back from Stanford, MIT, or Michigan. Not every department is on the same timeline, even within an institution. So, for example, bioengineering here at Berkeley usually gets their admissions out pretty quickly. Mechanical engineering is not on that same timeline. They tend to trickle out a little bit more. Some departments will do all of their admits all at once. Other departments will admit kind of more the trickle down of a few here, a few there throughout the whole process. So just because your friend has heard or you have heard from one institution doesn't mean you're not getting into another institution because the timelines are so unique for each department. And this year, that might be even more so the case because we don't know how admissions is going to look like. In most cases, admissions meetings are held in person with all the faculty attending. If we're not able to do that this year, it's going to be interesting to see how they communicate this all online or through a Zoom meeting or if they're going to do it through email. So timelines might be pushed back a little bit more for this upcoming year as well. But I just want to put that out there because I know students talk and I know there's a lot of social media out there that allows students from other institutions to talk to each other as well. Just to know to not freak out. Nothing's over until after the application due date, which is April 15th. April 15th is the day that you have to notify grad school where you want to go. And even then, that's not a hard deadline. So there could be some decisions on occasion that are made later in April or early June due to extenuating circumstances. So it's never really over until you get a letter that says you've not been admitted. Okay. So with that, I'm going to conclude. We have, oh my gosh, if we will answer some questions and anything we don't get to, I will put together in a frequently asked FAQ section and send it out to everyone. So I think my colleague Tiffany was going to read out questions.
Hi there. Yes. So what I've done is I've tried to kind of categorize the questions based on, you all have a lot of phenomenal questions, by the way, very good questions. So I'll go ahead and kind of read off some of these questions. First, financial aid. So we have a question, is there usually financial aid for master's programs?
Yes, if you are a domestic student, there is financial aid in terms of loans. So most master's programs are what we call self-funded, meaning that there's not a lot of institutional or free money the way there is for undergrad students. So if you apply through financial aid, meaning you submit a FAFSA, most likely the funding that you will receive will be a low interest loan. For international students, there is no financial aid for international students, unfortunately.
Okay, and then another semi-related question. I heard that work will sometimes pay for a master's degree. Is this true?
It is true. It's an educational benefit with many companies, and so that's something that you would want to ask about when you're negotiating your package when you before you accept a position to say what are some of the benefits. Usually, companies share that up front because it is a really good benefit that they will pay for you to get your education. Now, what that looks like could be different. Most companies are not going to let you take a semester or a year off to get it, so you're going to have to go part time. And it's usually not limited to engineering. So I've known students to go back and get their MBAs while working full time because and the company pays for it. So yes, it is true. It's a perk for different companies, and it's definitely something you want to ask about. If they don't share that with you as part of their incentive package, you want to ask about it.
Great. All right. So on to the GREs. So first of all, is for the fifth year masters at Berkeley, are the GREs required?
I don't think so. So the fifth year is the one I'm least familiar with because I'm not on that admissions committee, and I would double check with your department whoever the grad advisor is for your department who runs the fifth year program. I'm fairly certain that fifth year and MEng program for Berkeley students waives the GRE. So I believe there's no GRE for fifth, and the MEng program waives the GRE for Berkeley students. But I would double check with your department just to make sure, or on the application page, it should say.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, and then when should students start studying for the GRE?
I would say start the summer before you want to apply. So if you kind of go on that timeline of taking the test in August, I'd start in June. I wouldn't take, unless you are going to take the test during the semester, I wouldn't take time away from your studies during the spring semester or the fall semester to study for the GRE, unless you're taking it later that semester. But if you're going to take the August test date, I would start in June, so you don't have to cram it all in. And I would say probably about 2 weeks. And there's a lot of free information. You don't necessarily have to invest in one of these very expensive test study, whatever you call them, like Princeton Review or Kaplan. They have a lot of free things online, and really it's just like the SAT. It's just repetition and familiarizing yourself with the test. So if you just take the free, you can download free practice tests and take them multiple times, different ones, obviously. You'll start to see your scores go up if you're disciplined about it.
Great. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the letters of recommendation. We have a fair number of transfer students that are on the call, which is very awesome. A question we have for transfer students, is it okay to have letters of recommendation from their community college STEM faculty?
In general, I would say no, because community college professors help you get into your four-year school institution, and the four-year institution professors will help you get into grad school. The only exception might be that there are some community college professors that actually can have grants or run a lab. And if that is the case and you worked with them in a research setting, it's very rare, but there are some out there that do that. You can get a letter of recommendation from them as a researcher. But in general, I would say you having a community college professor is generally not going to be as helpful as having someone from Berkeley, from your four-year institution.
And what about non-STEM faculty from either community college or otherwise?
I wouldn't recommend non-STEM faculty. So non-engineering, but technical faculty, like a physics professor or chemistry professor, that's fine. But an English professor or a coach is generally not as helpful. So I know at undergrad that's really helpful because they want a really well-rounded overall student. In grad school, they want to know you as an engineer, with the exception of Berkeley, where we want that personal statement. Everything else should be very technical, a technical application.
Okay. And so on that note, a lot of students say that they have a hard time connecting with professors and getting letters from recommendation. How do you connect with a professor authentically?
So that depends at what point in your career you are. So if you are a freshman, sophomore, or even a junior, there's still time, especially if we are able to go back, even if we're not able to go back in the spring. So because there's no pressure yet to get a letter of recommendation from that faculty member. So usually what I say is if you've taken a faculty member's class that you really enjoy, and you want to talk to them a little bit more about their class, faculty love to talk about their content knowledge and their research. So you can just say, if you know, authentically, if you have to be interested. If you're not interested in that class, don't try to fake it because that's really hard. But if you're interested in that topic or whatnot, you can go and say, you know what, I really enjoyed your lecture today. You know, I read one of your papers that's listed on their website, and you know, could you tell me more about? And then just let them kind of take the lead from there. The other option is if you're interested in graduate school, you can talk to faculty about grad school too, and that's a very easy conversation to have. Because all faculty have gone to grad school. Most of them have at some point been on the admissions committee. So they have enough, and they all have grad students. So they all have that background knowledge to talk to you about graduate school. So if all else fails, but you really like a particular faculty member, you can talk to them about grad school and just see where the relation is. Some faculty, they're humans, right? Some faculty are going to be very chatty, very engaging, and others are more introverted and maybe aren't as chatty. So don't take it personally if there's no connection. Just find another faculty member. Um,
What if you're a TA? Can you ask for a letter from whomever you're TAing for? Or
Yeah.
should you?
Yes, for sure. Because if you're a PhD student applying to PhD programs, you will at some point have to GSI. So yeah.
Fantastic. You mentioned the difference between, you said showcase but don't show off. I think some students, we've had a couple students ask if you could maybe kind of elaborate on the difference between showcasing and showing off.
So it's more of when you write the essay and you find too many I did this and I did that. It becomes very apparent like you're bragging. And you want to brag, but you don't want to appear to brag. Actually, you don't want to brag. You want to let people know about your contributions to a project. And there is a nuanced way to do that when you're writing. And I know writing isn't the strength of all engineering students. So my recommendation is write what you want to write and then have several people read it over, even other engineering students, because it will come out. If it feels like you were talking too much about yourself in a sort of egocentric way, it will come out even to those who aren't, who writing is not their strength. If you have someone who is not an engineering major, who's sort of a social science or humanities major, they're really good at picking these things up. But the point is just you want to be humble. You want to showcase. You want to tell people about all of your contributions, but you don't want it to sound like you single-handedly found the cure to cancer. Um, so the best way to do that is just to have multiple people or one other person, two other people read your essay to say, is this a good vibe? Is this a good feel? Does this flow? Does it sound good?
Well, if anyone would find the cure to cancer, I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of our Berkeley students because you are all pretty
Agreed.
phenomenal.
For sure.
Um, Other question. Okay, so is it okay to have letters of recommendation from the professors that I want to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. Just make sure when you do that, though, um, that they are willing to write you a good letter, or that you feel that you will get a good letter from them. Because I know it's awkward to say, "Hey, can you write me a good letter?" So you can ask when you ask, you say, "Can you write me a strong letter of recommendation?" But yeah, absolutely. If you can get a positive letter from the professor that you want to work with, and let them know you want to work with them if you apply, let them know you're applying and that you want to work with them and see what the response is.
Okay. Does the rigor of one's undergraduate school play any role in grad admissions?
Officially, you won't find that information anywhere on the web, but unofficially, yes. Schools know, and this is being recorded, so I'm not going to name any names. But schools know which programs inflate their grades, which programs are actual grades, and which programs have such rigorous courses that getting an A is really, really hard. And Berkeley Engineering is in that last category. It's pretty well known that this is an extremely rigorous program where getting an A is so incredibly difficult that a 3.0 from Berkeley is not the same as a 3.0 from some other institutions.
Great. And these are some real, I have to say, because I recognize some of these names, and these are some really well thought out questions from incoming students. So if you're thinking about this stuff now, kudos to you. One question is, I'm a transfer student, and it seems like we need to apply for the 5th year this fall. So if the student is incoming, they're asking, do they apply to the 5th year master's this fall?
No, because it would be starting not if you're an incoming transfer student, no, because it's the 5th year master's is continuous, and you would apply a year in advance. So unless you are going to graduate in a year from with your undergrad, I believe you would apply next fall if
And
you are
for
for incoming.
And for a lot of the transfers, you might actually opt for a 5th semester. So that's
Yeah.
something to consider as well. Related, and this is, I think you alluded a bit about this at the beginning, but given that, there's limited networking opportunities due to the COVID, how would you recommend that new students network with faculty?
This is a tough one. I would say go to office hours. So depending on how classes are going to be held, let's take the worst case scenario and assume that the all classes are going to be online. I don't know that that's, I think most of them are going to be online, not all, but let's just say we head in the direction where all classes are online and so there's no faculty on campus at all. If you are a new incoming student or even a continuing student, really utilize whatever scenario they have for office hours. Um, in some ways, I actually think getting a hold of professors might be easier when if they're kind of shelter in place versus on campus, um, because the response has I find faculty are responding faster right now because they're not traveling, they're not working in their lab, they are at on their laptop all the time. So I would say take advantage of those office hours. It is especially for first year students coming in, like this is going to be your first experience with a faculty member and it's online. And I know that that's unusual and sometimes awkward, but force yourself to go to at least one office hours, preferably not before a big midterm or a big paper or something during a lull period, just to introduce yourself and to, and again, if you don't have any questions, just go back to, you're all on this call or on this webinar, so you have some inkling of interest in graduate school. So if you find that you have nothing else to talk about, ask about graduate school. Ask about, what area, if you're interested in AI and you want to talk to a CS professor, say, what programs, I did a peripheral research. I'm interested in, MIT and Michigan. What do you think about that? Or what do you think about the future of AI in this area? Just come up with some questions that are comfortable to you, that you can present to the faculty members. So if there's nothing else, you can always come back to the grad school question.
Okay, another question. My understanding is that applying for a PhD requires the possession of a master's. Is that true?
Nope, that is the longest living legend. I have, I hear that every year, and you know what? I shouldn't dismiss it. It's not the case in engineering. It is not the case. It might be the case in other fields. It is not the case in engineering. You absolutely do not have to have a master's. In fact, if you know you want a PhD and you have prepared for a PhD, I recommend you go straight for the PhD. The only time I recommend an MS is if you don't have enough research experience or if your grades are not where they want you to, where you want them to be, and so you want to beef up your credentials a little bit more. But if you absolutely know you want to do a PhD, just go straight.
Okay, and semi-related question, and I wish this person put their name because this is a really good question. I'm happy they asked this one. I'm thinking about pursuing a graduate degree in a different discipline. Graduated with a BS in mechanical, but want a graduate degree in electrical. Is it a bad idea to apply for a 2-year MS in the new discipline since I don't have any undergraduate courses under my belt?
So no, none of what you said is a bad idea, and it's actually very common. So cross-disciplinary degrees these days, especially within engineering, is becoming more and more common. And you don't necessarily have to get the MS first. So if you've taken some electrical engineering courses, not necessarily all of them, but you've taken some, if you have experience, research experience in electrical engineering, that should be and you have letters of recommendation that you could write that even for mechanical engineers that can speak to your ability to do well in an electrical program. Those two departments overlap quite a bit. Many departments have natural overlap, so it's not a stretch to say, okay, from mechanical to electrical. It's a stretch to go from, let's say, bioengineering to philosophy, or I should say the other way around, philosophy to bioengineering, right? That's a really big leap. But when you're going from one technical to another, you don't necessarily always have to get the MS first in that other discipline. If you have some undergrad coursework, not necessarily all, but some, and you have experience, that's going to be the more important part. You want to go from mechanical to electrical? What made you make that leap? Was it a course? Was it experience? Was it a research project? Something made you decide you want to go that other way, and that's sort of the key to securing how competitive you might be.
Okay, another really good question. I am a first author. Oh, congrats. First
Yeah.
author published in a scientific journal. Will this help me get into grad school?
Yes, it will. But I want to say for the vast majority of undergrads who are not going to have for any publication, let alone first author, so kudos to you. It's not a requirement. We're getting there. I think at some point, maybe when your kids apply to PhD programs, it might be a requirement that they have um, publications. But at this point, um, having publications is very nice. And it will certainly help you if you do not. But the reverse is not true. If you do not have a publication, it is not going to hurt you. I
And
just
what
want to
if
be clear. Yeah.
and what if you have a publication? For example, this person has a publication in astrophysics, but they're a civil engineer. So if it's not directly related to the graduate program.
I think it's still okay if it's technical, if it's a technical publication. And what you would do when you write your essay is, okay, how did this happen? Like, are you an astrophysicist and now you want to become a civil engineer? And what's the story? What's the technical story there of how you're going from point A to point B? Because this is a nonlinear track, and that's fine. We get lots of students that have kind of deviated from their department, and that's totally fine. You just have to tell your story of how you got there.
Okay. And then how long are the typical statements of purpose?
So we don't have at Berkeley, we don't have a limit, but I would say probably the average is going to be 2 pages single spaced, a page and a half to 2 pages single spaced. I wouldn't go over that just because they're reading a lot of faculty are reading a lot of applications, and they start to grumble when things get too long. And you don't know where you are in the queue of when they're reading it either, right? So human nature takes a toll. So if you are the first one that they're reading, they might be great. I'm starting my pile of applications. If you're number 782, they might be fatigued, and now that you have a 7 page essay, they might be less generous. Most essays I see are around 2 pages, single spaced. Other schools might have limits, word limits. There's usually a word limit or word count.
Okay. And then I think we have time for just a couple of more. Let's see, ones that we didn't get into. Oh, do the GREs expire?
They do. I believe they're good for 5 years.
Okay.
So if you are not going to grad school this year, don't take them because there's absolutely no point. Take them next year, study next year, and then just, I don't, if you apply this year and you don't get in and you want to use your GRE scores again, that's one thing. But if you're not planning on applying to grad school until the future, don't take the GREs until the future comes, until you're ready.
Okay. And then can you apply for multiple types of programs at the same school? For example, can you apply to the MS, the MS-PhD, and 5th year at the same institution?
Not at Berkeley. So Berkeley is very strict. You can apply to one degree program. That's it. In one department, you get one application at Berkeley. MIT does not have a limit. But MIT has also said unofficially that if you apply to more than three, then they start wondering, are you just trying to get into MIT versus a particular department? And then Stanford, I believe some of their departments has a question of if you're applying to PhD, if you're applying to the PhD program, and there's a question that if you don't get in, would you be willing to be considered for the master's program? So every school, every program is going to be different. Yeah, some schools will allow you to apply. I would follow the MIT model though and not apply, even if you can, not apply to more than two at one institution. I know they say three, but I think any more than two, because they do start to question why are you applying to so many.
Okay. And last question. I heard that if you go to Berkeley and as an undergrad, it is hard for you to get into Berkeley as a grad. Is that true?
That's another legend that keeps living on and on and on. Not in engineering, no. So in engineering, there is no bias against Berkeley undergrads. Uh, in fact, it might actually be a little bit more beneficial because the faculty know you, and so they're able. Well, I guess that's a double-edged sword. Depends on how well they know you and in what context. But they're going to know. They know their curriculum better than they know anybody else's curriculum. So they know that an A in a particular class is really difficult. They know the faculty that are writing your letters of recommendation the way no other faculty know. So yes, you can apply. We have many of our own students get into our PhD programs and our MEng programs. There's no bias against Berkeley students whatsoever in engineering. Now, I don't know if that's the case if you're looking at applying to other graduate programs outside of engineering at Berkeley. So I know that College of Chemistry does encourage their undergrads to go to other institutions. So I don't know how a Berkeley engineering undergrad would be reviewed in, let's say, the College of Chemistry.
Phenomenal. And then this will be available to students afterwards, the recording.
Yes. So
Great.
we will send it out along with a link with any questions we didn't get to. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention that if you are a Berkeley student, that I do have advising hours for one-on-one meetings. So if you have specific questions or you want to talk about your grad school pathway, those advising hours, you can make an appointment the same way you would with your ESS advisor. You would just select me, and my advising hours are likely Wednesday afternoon. I'm probably going to add an extra day this year because of the need and the way that we are doing these appointments online. And the fact that I think there's a lot more questions this year than there have been in the past. So certainly, if you want a one-on-one appointment, you can make it through the ESS advising online, starting in fall.
Wonderful. And then I see a number of new students. So if you're going to be doing T-Prep this summer, Meltem has generously volunteered to present twice. So you'll have an additional opportunity to meet with her. Thank you so much. I think Laura says we're running out of time, but these
Yeah,
are amazing questions.
great. Well, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your summer. And if you have questions that can't wait until we get this up, or you want to email me, you can certainly email me questions, and I'm happy to respond that way too.